We are going to sort of cover a general overview of like a bunch of different things. So while I'm not going to say that you'll be an expert by the end of this session, I do think that you will have like a general understanding of what it is, what is part of the grant writing world, and and what is required from being part of the team, as well as Lindsay is going to be covering mostly on how those are evaluated. So I think that between the two of us, we might sort of give you like a more complete picture as to what is required. Okay, next slide.
Amna, one thing, just because I realized neither of us mentioned it, if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to take yourself off mute and ask. This is best as a conversation, so let us know if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Please let this be like an interactive thing where we're not just sort of throwing a bunch of information at you. We do have an activity planned for all of you at the end, but feel free to ask any questions or get more clarification on something that we say. So typically a grant, the way sort of I look at it, is not sort of done in a vacuum. It's not simply something that a grant writer is going to put together in an application and submit. It really goes through an entire sort of organic life cycle. And that's true whether the grant is a federal grant, whether you're applying for a foundation. It might be that you are collaborating with a corporate sponsor for a contract. So whatever that is, you probably are going to be going over these specific stages within that life cycle. The first is obviously planning. You want to have some idea of what it is that what you're looking for, and can't just be I need money. Although most of the times that tends to be what nonprofits, how they are approaching the funding announcements. There are so many announcements out there, so you really want to find the opportunity that gives you the best possible chance of success, because the rate of acceptance is usually so low. So I think is like also key. And then obviously you build it and you apply. And these three sections can really be anywhere between 6 to 8 months. So earlier is better. I know a lot of, especially within my own team, we had folks who said that, oh, I work best or I write best at closer to the deadline. If you're going to be applying for multi-million-dollar grants, you want to start as early as possible. And early in the grant verse is measured in months, not in days or weeks. And then obviously once you've applied, that's when sort of the post-submission part of it starts, in which the grant makers or the sponsors are going to be referring. They will have their own team reviewing it, making the award, and then you do the programmatic part of it. You implementing whatever the project is, submitting reports, etc., and sharing the results with the public. Okay, next slide. So typically, like I said before, you as a grant writer, you will not be you won't be flying solo unless it's like a very small operation, and even then you might be, there will be other folks who will have input on how to put it together. So you do want one person to be either, if it's a researcher, the principal investigator of the grant. If it's a programmatic fund that you're applying for, then the project leader, who's going to guide the sort of direction of the narrative, which is really the main chunk of everything that you're looking for. And I think it's really important for these two folks to either be the same person or be on the same team, because it can be so disconnected when the person who's eventually going to be implementing it is not part of the writing process. Because you can make a really pretty package and submit it, and then let's say the grant is awarded, and now the project manager is like looking at it, thinking in terms of operations, what am I going to do with this? Like, how on earth am I going to, translate this into work on the ground? So this person, I feel like if it is not, then that's a red flag that they need to be front and center of the grant writing team. You have your finance folks. So just because you're a grant writer doesn't mean necessarily that you need to be, that you're the accountant as well. So you might rely on the folks within your organization who are going to put together the budget for you, making sure that within the funding announcement, they're looking at the level of effort, what allowable costs are there. Did you sort of, for example, budget for equipment where the funding announcement said that that's just not going to fly for this particular sponsor? And then you have the organization's pre-award team. So at CHOP, for example, we have like a bunch of people, including like me, who are going to go over the compliance stuff. So if it's a research grant, for example, do the folks have proper IRB protocols? Did you get the appropriate signatures from everyone? Are you doing a collaboration with another organization? And if so, did you sort of, put all of their information within the grant? And these are all the things that I feel the person who is spearheading, like the project leader, isn't really thinking about so much, or the writer. They just want to get the narrative section in. And whereas these are the things that are unique to the various funders and the various sponsors, and are just going to screen you out even before they get to your narrative. So if you sort of like miss out here, you're not even going to make it to the next round. And finally, you have a signing authority who's going to be the representative of the organization saying that, yes, I endorse this. This is like, actually, it's funny because most sponsors do not make funds to individuals. So even though you might have like a really awesome research scientist or a project leader with a great track record, and they're the one who are putting in the funding, the grant itself is probably going to be to the institution, not to the person. So unless you have the support of the organization itself, it just won't go through. So you want to make sure that you have all these administrative pieces in place well before the deadline, so that you don't sort of miss out on submitting it. Next slide, please. So typically, here are the main sections of the grant. I have worked on foundation, on federal, as well as on corporate grants. By and large, this kind of remains the structure of whatever kind of funding you're applying for. And if you have sort of answers for all of these sections, you're probably in a good shape of putting in your grant. The first is obviously the abstract or the summary. You want to give the sponsor or whoever is reviewing it a really good high level overview of what the results are going to, like, what are you trying to achieve, or what are you trying to get out of it. And then you sort of, once you have that idea, you start building your team. What if it's a programmatic grant, are you involving the right folks in it? Do you just have people in there for their name, or are they going to have a valuable or a significant contribution with the proper level of effort on the grant? The significance, innovation and approach sections are what create the body of the narrative. So you want to think of your research strategy or your program plan in terms of these three sections. What are you trying to do? Like, and why are you trying to do it? Like, what does it matter that you, as opposed to the hundreds of other folks who are applying for the sponsor, um, um, why should you be given this money? Innovation. These days, the only way to like really stand out from all your competitors is to show that whatever you're doing is new, or your approach is new, or you're going to be saving the funder money by improving the process of your approach. And then finally, you want to show that you have ability, resources, your methodology, it makes sense. There's like a direct link between what you're planning and what you're going to do on the ground. So I worked with an education nonprofit where I was part of the writing team, as well as the plan was that if we got the grant, I would be the project manager of the education grant. And one of the things that the project team, the organization really wanted us to put in there was that we were going to buy tablets for every single student, and then make these awesome videos and educational videos, and sort of implement them within 8 months of, like, that was the timeline that they were suggesting. They said that this was ambitious, it was going to save time, we were going to do it in this amount of money. And I was looking at it more in terms of, okay, so we're a government body. That means that we have to make an announcement for where we're going to buy these tablets from. We can't just go to the market and buy them. As a government body, we need to like make a call out for bids. That entire process is 90 days from the point of announcement to the point where somebody can bid and say, where you can say that, okay, we will buy the tablets from these folks. That's 90 days. So the timeline was all wrong. This is why I say that it's like super important to make sure that whosoever is going to be working on the ground, whether it's a project or whether it's a scientific research, you want to make sure that they really look at this section and to see that it's robust, that it's not just pretty words to say that to just get the funding. If you have a product, you want to also share a marketing strategy. If you have a service, you want to share that, how are you going to sort of reach the target consumer, etc. So this section sort of comes in there. The budget also needs to be super realistic. And I cannot stress this enough. Again, this is another section that I would want the person actually working on the grant, the operations person, to take like a good hard look here. Because a lot of the times you're going to, put in money for the big fancy computer but you might not think about, somebody has to go to the market, burn fuel, sit in a car, and there's no money for fuel. So is the organization going to pay for it? Does the fund allow overheads? Is there any money in here that can be for miscellaneous or toilet paper money or anything really? The roof crashes, the computers that came in, one of them fell. Did you put in any kind of surplus in the grant, and did the sponsor even allow for it to let you get away with something like that? If there is a cost share, and by cost share, we mean that for every amount that the funder gives, the organization also has to put in a certain percentage of their own money. You want to double check on that. It's really, sometimes I've seen organizations put in cost share to stand out, even though it's not required by the funder. And what that does is that if you put that in, then you have to put up that money. you've gotten the award now, the organization is that money is essentially spoken for. And for whatever reason, if the organization doesn't have that money, you're in trouble. Then your entire sort of project and your entire grant is in trouble. So yeah, work with the budget folks, make sure that these are all allowable costs, work with the organization and make sure you have the institutional support for the funds that you're putting in there. Collaboration, I briefly already mentioned it. It's not necessary for you to have expertise in every single thing that you're suggesting that you're going to do. So you might outsource particular expertise to someone, some other organization. At CHOP, we routinely work with Penn, with other hospitals to say that, we'll get patients or data from so-and-so. This investigator is going to bring in their expertise in here. And then you obviously, budget that in as well to say that it's the consultants or the sub-sites principal investigator that's going to be giving in their time, so their salary, that organization's overhead, etc. So all of these things you want to sort of look at the bigger picture here. It's not necessary, and I highly would discourage smaller nonprofits to think that they can hire a team and an expert in every single thing. You do not want to become an expert if you're a small nonprofit in something that you do not see in your strategic plan in the next 5 or 10 years. Why? And I go back to my experience with the education grant. We ended up hiring like 30 folks to, create those videos from scratch. We're making animations, and suddenly our university is in the business of making animations and videos. And it's like, why? Why are we doing this? Is this something that's going to be a permanent feature of this university? Or wouldn't it have made more sense for us to just outsource that to like a animation group or something, So something to think about long term, that whatever you're putting in, if you get funded, it might be that's when the problem is going to start. And then you actually have to do something with that money. And finally, you want to have a very robust monitoring and evaluation plan. So this is money that you kind of almost like caretakers of it. And if it's taxpayer money, it becomes even more complicated, because you're stewards in a way. So you want to make sure that whatever money you're getting, you are doing your own due diligence as an organization, and you have the capacity to do that, to make sure that your project team has a work plan, has put in their own Q&A, is thinking in terms of things that will go wrong, because things always go wrong. But have you sort of considered, what kind of protections or what kind of contingency plans are going to be in place? Do you have enough internal checks and balances? Is there a conflict of interest, for example, especially true in like procurement or services? That did you just end up giving some consulting agreement to somebody's brother-in-law because, or did you really make sure that they were the expert in that particular service? Next slide. Any questions so far? Feel free to ask. So, okay, so I tend to think of the writing process in at least 4 stages. Usually, if it is a larger grant, if we're talking about millions of dollars, it should be more than that. If you're talking about collaborating with other organizations, again, it should be more than that. But in the first draft, and this is my approach, everybody's approach is different, but in the first draft, I would not even put anything down on paper. I would not write down an abstract. I would not write down a narrative, nothing like that. All I had in front of me would be a bunch of questions. And I would make sure that I had answers for all of those questions. And sometimes those answers required me to talk to the finance guy or the marketing guy or the operations guy or gal, and making sure that, you know, the idea itself is robust, that the fit, it's a good fit for the funding announcement. And this was very high detail. And around this time is when I would be having conversations with everybody and inviting them to like poke as many holes and ask me as many questions and say, but did you think about this? What if this happens? What if that happens? Just basically getting as much information that I can before I put anything down on paper. And in my experience, I would say about 60 to 70% of the time, this is when the idea would be weeded out. Like I would not have to waste my time putting anything down on paper, because just in that question phase, it would make sense that this doesn't seem feasible. This seems too ambitious. So maybe it's just not worth the time and effort we'll be putting in if we're going to be getting $10,000 at the end of it. So, but sometimes it's worth all that effort, and you know, so you're like, okay, we're going to go ahead and start writing down something. So in the second draft is when I would want the budget to be at least mostly finalized. That would give us like some, again, this would be my second check to make sure that what is the value for the amount of work and the energy we're putting in this. So if you know, you put in all the numbers and it comes to that, based on the timeline, based on the budget that you're proposing, based on the effort of our most expensive principal investigator or so on, it's not worth it. Again, it's just going to get weeded out here. Around this time is as soon as like you begin to have like a good sense of, okay, the pieces are coming together, the budget seems to be fairly realistic, we could potentially do this. So this is when I would also start gathering all the administrative pieces, because they take the longest. There's so much red tape anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in Pakistan, it doesn't matter if you're in the US. I found that, you know, the amount of time it takes to get somebody to sign something or to respond to an email, especially now that we're remote, is it's just going to take forever. So you want to start doing this, I would say, like a few weeks in advance. If you do not have your administrative pieces in place and locked, because they're not going to change, right? That if the institutional commitment to the grant is not going to change a week before or 2 weeks before. So if that is not in place 5 days before the deadline, in my mind, I know that I'm probably not making this deadline. It's just not going to happen. So that's the sort of absolute, you know, deadline that I give to myself, that like 5 days before I need to have the administrative pieces in place. If there are IRB protocols that are required, they need to come in already. Or at the very least, we need to have a document that says that it's pending, but we have put in the application for it. You know, something to show the funders to say that you're thinking along these lines. Once you have like all of these in place, that's when I would have like a checklist and go back to the funding announcement, make sure that I've covered every question or every section that they've asked for. And I would also give it to an internal review team that was not part of the writing process, to say that if you read this, does it make sense to you? You have absolutely no background on what my thought process is. There might be things in there that are very obvious to me that, I mean, obviously we're going to, you know, we're going to need money for fuel for like a trip or something. But from like a reviewer's point of view, it might not be obvious to them. And they might sort of, you know, bring those questions that you might refine some more. Yeah, I think that's sort of where I'm at in terms of the writing. Lindsay, I will hand this over to you, and feel free to add anything if I missed it. So yeah, any questions so far in terms of the writing process or, um, you know, my approach or anything?
Thanks, Amna. I don't see any questions coming in. Okay. Um, Amna, I'm gonna ask you a specific. I turned off my video before because my internet just decided to really struggle. So if I have my phone here and if it's getting really choppy, if you could just shoot me a text and I will turn my
Okay.
video back off. Um, so that was an awesome overview of all of the steps that go into the actual grant writing. Thanks, Amna, for that. The only thing I would say as sort of the caveat to that is you were in the big leagues, right? Like working with government grants, NIH needing, some significant approvals for traditional philanthropic grants. So for foundations or smaller single issue or niche funders like uh, the firm where I work, the timeline can drastically change, right? So for instance, I would say that the majority of the grantees we work with have probably been brainstorming the ideas that they're applying to us for probably 1 to 3 months, as opposed to that longer sort of year-long lead time. And the determinations also, because we are, smaller and a bit more nimble, can come far more quickly. So I make grants on a rolling basis, and my investment committee meets every month. So usually, when people approach us for funding, they are never more than about 4 to 8 weeks away from a determination. So definitely look up and feel free to ask the program officer with whom you're working, or usually if you can't connect with a program officer before applying, you can connect with a grants administrator, et cetera, to find out kind of what the turnaround time might be. But yeah, so I will take it from here. So Amna has crafted a beautiful grant application. It is perfect, I am sure. And so here we go with our diligence pieces. The first would be a review of the application materials. And this can differ a lot from funder to funder in terms of what is required. But some things that I think you will see in basically any grant that you apply for is financial information, right? So we would be doing a review. From my standpoint, we like to review 2 to 3 years of finances leading up to the application. We like to read all of those narrative pieces that Amna has laid out that you would be working on. And we are very kind of interested, especially in that budget, the estimated cost pieces, and then a line item narrative of how you intend to spend the money. And on top of that, the kind of last piece that dictates sort of the timing of our diligence even is the timeline. If you're looking to undertake a project starting in 4 weeks, obviously we got to move a lot more quickly than if you apply to us with 6 months of lead time. So that's usually the first cursory review is of whatever is submitted from the grant applicant. And then step two, we like to have conversations and interviews with pertinent internal stakeholders. So that would be likely the executive directors at the very least of the nonprofits. But if there's going to be someone who's administering the program and that person is allocated at the time of application, we might ask to speak with them. If we have any financial concerns, we might ask to speak with the CFO or whoever handles your organization's books. And then we really also like to speak with the board because, not the whole board, but a member of the board. Obviously, the boards are the ultimate fiduciaries in nonprofits, and they will be the ones sort of held accountable to how those funds are spent. And if the board is not supportive of the organization's application for this grant, that's also very important to know, because otherwise that can, cause significant roadblocks to getting the objectives of the grant done. And so then from there, if pertinent, we would have conversations or interviews with external stakeholders. So if, let's say, for instance, you're applying for funding for a program that you've been running for 3 years already, we might ask to speak with someone who's participated in the program, to see how they feel the experience was and how the program administration is going. Not too many external stakeholders will likely be asked. You might also, the only other thing I can think of really other than a program participant might be an existing funder, to understand a little bit more about your revenue streams and how you've been supported in the past. And then from there, we'd worked on grant structure and pieces. That's a mainly internal process for the grant evaluator. So if a grant determination is going to be recommended to, for instance, I have an investment committee of 2 representatives that I need to pass every grant through before I can make a final determination. But it might just be the program officer you're working with at a larger foundation, or it could be a larger committee. So you are totally within your rights as an applicant to ask about the structure of the investment committee and who will be sort of making these determinations. But yeah, we would look at whether, sort of if it makes sense to structure it as a 6-month grant or a 2-year grant, if it makes sense to, pay it out to one organization, or if you have collaborators, to split the funds, pay directly for the pieces that, to whoever will be providing each of the pieces. But sort of the most common thing to determine in grant structuring is whether or not it will be a phased grant. So for instance, let's say you've applied for a multi-year, 3-year grant for running an after-school program. Are we going to pay all of that out in a lump sum at the beginning, or are we going to do that in annual installments? Will we be asking for, proof of funding spent as interim reports, etc.? So there are all kinds of nuances that we can get into with grant structuring, but a lot of them are very boring, so I will not go much further. And then the final step is notification to the grant applicant of grant determination and feedback delivery. So something that's extremely important, you're always within your rights, if you're applying for a grant, to ask for feedback on it, whether or not you receive the funding. Especially if you don't receive the funding, right? It might be extremely useful to know why that was the case and be able to improve on future applications.
I would just like to add, so Lindsay, great point about adding that you have conversations with the external stakeholders. That was also true in my experience. And one of the things that we learned as an organization was that we would put in sort of letters of support, even if it was not necessarily asked for, like 2 or 3 from previous funders that we had worked with, or the program that we were working on, the end user of those, just to sort of like add that, here's what our experience is, and here's what these folks have to say about us. So that's something that you might want to think about including in your grant package as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Amna. So then in terms of follow-up from grant evaluators, right? There are a lot of funders, larger foundations especially, where you have to make, and I'm sure this was your case, Amna, with government grants, where when you submit, you cannot change a comma afterward, right? Like there is no negotiation to whatever that final package you present is. However, with smaller and more niche funders, like the fund that I manage, et cetera, there could be a fair amount of conversation between you and your program officer before you get a determination. And that's, becoming more common within the field of grant making as an equity process. But I find that I learn more as a grant maker probably during this conversational phase than I would ever learn from an application that's just, typed and not on paper. You cannot understand like someone's work until I feel fully until they tell you about it and why it's important to their community. So you might be seeing things like this more even with traditional foundations. But so some common questions that you might think about on the front end before even submitting an application would be, what role would this play in our nonprofit community? What need is it filling? What is the appropriate size or duration for the grant period? Is it feasible? These are all pieces that, I think at its most effective, you're able to co-create as a nonprofit and a funder together. Are there any contingencies to delivering on the proposal? Like, for instance, it might be a $2.5 million project, but your application to us was for the 1 million. So we would need to know, like, would that other 1.5 million need to be secured in order for it to get started? Is that something where you have a little bit of runway and you can raise the money over time? What's going to be necessary to really, start delivering on what you're proposing? So funding's one piece that might be a consideration for. It might be personnel, right? You're proposing a new program and you'll need to hire somebody to manage it. Or you might need a whole new database for the type of data and participant information you'll be collecting. So those are important to identify from the onset. What has been your process for evaluating risks and roadblocks? What are the mitigants you have identified? So there is almost nothing, right, that you could be taking on and applying for funding for that will not have a single element of risk. So just putting some significant time into thinking about that and how that's going to be handled. Handle it as a when question, not an if, and then be pleasantly surprised if none of it comes to light, right? If we were to share this application with your community, what would that reaction be? So let's say I'm on after school program today. You've already started an after school program and been running it for K-5, and now you would like to add on an element for junior high students. What would some parents of the participants in your existing program say? What would your existing funders say about that? Would they think that you and your organization are up to the challenge? What would your staff say? Are they already burnt out running one after school program and there's no internal capacity to do more? So thinking about those things can help you understand the implications of the grant from as many angles as you can anticipate. Based on the standard in the field, is this a cost-effective intervention? Right? Like, if everyone else in town is running an after school program for $15 per day per participant and yours is coming out to like $40 a day per participant, what is that cost differential? What's accounting for that? And is it going to be kind of a worth it additional expense? And then what is the ultimate impact of this intervention and how will it be measured, which we are about to go into a little bit more. Anything to add on that one, Amna?
No, I think you covered it.
Cool.
Yeah.
So first we'll go over a couple of things that can really set a grant apart. So first and foremost, is this an intervention that is needed, right, for the community that you're serving? That's that significance and impact piece. If everyone's needs in a community are already being met, and you're applying to do a duplicative process, it may not go as well. Novelty and innovation, that's extremely important to some funders, right? Like, is this a fresh new thing that you're trying, or is this something tried and true that you have a proven track record of doing, which leads to strong track record. Obviously, with newer programs, that's more difficult to prove, but a way to handle that for things that are newer is if people have pertinent expertise on the team, or if you'll be bringing in people who collaborate, as Amna highlighted with the collaborators. Are you going to bring in people who do know and have, some experience doing at least a component of what you're trying to do, even if you're trying to totally shift it up to make something unique and innovative. Preliminary data has this been researched in terms of, is there a need for it? Is it feasible at all? Has it been tried before? If so, have you talked to the folks who have tried it before and seen, what went wrong and what went right and all that? In terms of the writing, you're looking for a clear and focused approach and rationale. I am a grammar nerd. I cannot more highly say that, some clear writing can get you so far in a grant process. Proofread ruthlessly, have more people read it for you. I feel like every recommendation, even that I write, and every application that I write, I have at least 2 other people check after me. And they always catch things, even if you're extremely careful. Once you're in the weeds for long enough, you're going to start missing things.
Yeah, I just want to add here. So I don't know whether this was unique to my experience, but something that I encountered a fair bit was that for some reason the institution at one point, one of the institutions I was working for was very hesitant to put in clear measurable goals because they were scared that if we didn't achieve those goals that something bad would happen. So to keep things as vague as possible so that the funder that we can later argue that that was open to interpretation. I would say that rather than that approach, it might make sense for you to start having a conversation with your program officer and your grants person earlier on, and outline the clear approach, but still say that this is what our thought process is, this is what we're planning for, this might go wrong, that we might need to change our approach in this way. I think that makes for like a better argument than just sort of writing something which could mean like a million different things. That might actually lead to your application just being rejected. Yeah.
That's a great point of clarification, Amna. Thank you. And yeah, as Amna just segued perfectly into measurable results, right? You should at least have a clear idea of what you'd like success to be when you are writing that application. If that changes over time, as you're starting to do the work and you see that there's no way we're getting this done in 3 years, it's going to take 5 to 7, you communicate that with your funders, right? But you should at least have, consensus around how long it will take to do exactly what when you're starting out. And then organizational support and careful attention to detail, right? Having that support of the board, the staff, people who are close to you do think this is a good idea that you're trying to undertake what you're taking on. Careful attention to detail, as I said, proofread. And then, awarded, you'll get a grant award hopefully, or a renewal if it's a recurring funder. And then in terms of some things that can tend to go wrong when writing a grant application, I won't spend too much time on this because we've spent a lot of time on what will make it go right, but having a lack of clear theory of change or strategic direction for the grant period, it's not what a funder wants to see. Lack of research or factual contentions to support the model proposed. So if you haven't done the research and realized that someone 1 county over piloted something extremely similar, 2 months ago, unfortunately that might be able to come back to bite you. Fit, right? Either organizational fit for the program that you're proposing, or a fit for the application in terms of the funder's priorities. So if you are looking to pilot a community food bank, but you apply to a funder who only works in, I don't know, preschool and early education, yes, there are definitely places where a lot of social concerns are closely interconnected. But if it says, we're an education funder, and you're applying for things that aren't education or educational related, might not yield favorable results. And then in terms of the organizational structure, are you a 6-person firm who's asking to pilot a program that's going to take at least 20 people to run? Like, as a funder, we might say, this seems like it's not the right fit. It's a great idea, but it doesn't seem like you're the right person to be piloting this, because that would represent an over 300% growth. So thinking about those things. And then if it's not aligned with your organization's mission, if you are a after school program, sorry, it's been a long day. I feel like I have very few examples. If you're an after school program and you're looking to pilot something completely different, like, I don't know, political advocacy for health, right? Like health issues, that likely would not go well. And then poor writing or grammar, never a good thing. Proofread results.
Yeah, I just want to add here that so sometimes you apply for their funding cycles for the sponsor. So like they might have a similar announcement once or twice a year that you will have opportunities to apply for. And in that case, it becomes slightly difficult to figure out what their priorities or what their fit is. So most of the grants that are awarded, either the funder themselves or someone is collecting that data, and you can see that in the last 5 years, who have they funded, what kind of projects have they funded, and see what their direction is in that sense, and if what you're applying for is a good fit for them. That's also like a good way of making sure that you have like a fair chance of getting that grant.
Great point, Amna. Thank you for that. So then in terms of actually designing metrics, there are some pieces, like very, things that you might be piloting that haven't been done before, or large scale interventions where this sort of SMART framework would not work. But for most organizations, mid-sized, small, even large, this is a good place to start when you're thinking about your metrics. So SMART is a fun little acronym. The S stands for specific. Are the metrics clear and well-defined? Oh my goodness, defined. Can performance be assessed against them? M is measurable. Can progress be measured while the work is underway? How will we know when it's complete? So if there are no sort of benchmarks and milestones along the way that are defined, how will you know that you're getting to that end result? So it's good to have those sort of interim pieces. A is achievable. Is everything in place from the front end to meet the metric? If not, is there a plan? So that comes down to those contingency pieces, right? Like, do we need more funding than what we're applying to you for in order to make this work? Do we need staff, supplies, etc.? Are realistic? That kind of goes hand in hand with achievable, but is there the capacity to complete this project? Are the dependencies considered and accounted for? And T is timely. Has the timeline been mapped to complete the work? Are details of delivery planned? And of course, I would venture to say, I don't know the percentage for all of the philanthropic community, obviously, but especially in a year such as this, about 60% of my grantees over the past 12 months have changed their timelines. Totally understandable, right? Like, so having those conversations as soon as you know that there might be a shift, or if an event happens that's going to push things down the road, but you still have intention on completing the grant period, it just needs to be a little flexible. The sooner you communicate that with your funders, the better it will go. And then this last piece I have here is reporting, because most grants will have a reporting component, definitely at the end of the grant period, but often there'll be interim reports if it's a long enough grant period. So the majority of the grants I make are either 6 months or 2 years. If it's a 6-month grant period, we ask for a very informal, it can be a few sentences in an email type of update about halfway through, just to understand if the sort of targets are changing, if you will need more time, et cetera. Our 2-year grant structures, we usually have interim reports due every 6 months. So you'll produce 4 reports over the course of the period. It's totally up to the funder how they want to structure that. But some common questions that you should be paying attention to as you're doing the work so that it's easier to report upon it when it's time to do so are here. I won't go through all of them because I'm sure you all will read them and we're sending around this info afterward. But broadly, you're going to be looking to sort of justify the activities that you used to accomplish the grant, asking if that changed significantly over time, how it was measured, and was the progress made kind of commensurate with what you expected it to be over the period from the original proposal? Are there any sort of unexpected learnings that you've had, right? What types of significant internal or external challenges did you meet as you tried to take on the work? And then almost always there's going to be an ask for a budget reconciliation where, we gave you $500,000. You need to sort of show us how you spent all of that. And that'll usually be in the form of a line item budget with an accompanying narrative. And then what's going to happen now that the grant period's over with the program that you began or the intervention that you took on? Are you applying to us for more funding? Are you applying to someone else for more funding? Did it not work and you are going to, be trying something different? So we like to know what the sort of future of the interventions created are. So for these key takeaways, Amna, do you want to cover some of these?
Yeah, I would basically, they're very generic. Grant writing is not a science. It is so organic. You're working with the folks. There's usually like a need you're trying to fill. I would just say that start planning early. Lindsay is right that I've had the opportunity to work for like larger organizations and government grants, but even I think that for smaller opportunities like a sponsored contract from a private company, you do want to start the conversation as early as possible, given their time frame, because there's going to be a lot of negotiation about back and forth, and you want to think of time that especially if you're applying for funding and you're anticipating a period of time when you're not going to have funds, you want to look at it from that point of view, that you need to have funds in place at least a month before you actually need them. You don't want to be, waiting to spend rent money and being like, oh, we're still waiting for answers for that grant and so and so. Apply for the right opportunities. We've covered that. Refer to the prior funding. So just be clear and be realistic. Don't be overly ambitious. Don't try to do more than what you as like your organization's mission is. Just don't try to become something else. You kind of always want to come back to your own strategic plan and your direction and make sure that you're sort of staying true to that, and the values of what you set out to do, and not just sort of writing for money for the sake of it. In the end, I would just basically say that don't forget to reapply or request for feedback if you don't get funded. Grants are awarded, there's like a high rate of rejection. Don't get disheartened by that. It's just like the nature of the game. Do sort of learn from it and reapply, and sort of work on on that proposal. Don't just sort of shelve it that, oh, this didn't get funded. We need to start off with something completely new and fresh. So yeah, Lindsay.
Perfect. Just being cognizant of time, I think we should roll into the activity. So I'm going to stop the screen share for now, just so we can get into the breakout groups, and then maybe